Looking way ahead to the MLB Draft this year, the Nationals have three prospects that you're going to want to take a look at. One of them went to LSU.
You are Locked On Nationals, your daily Washington Nationals podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And thank you all for making Locked On Nationals your first listen every single day, as we are free and available wherever you get your podcast. I'm your host, Ryan Clary. You can catch me over on Twitter at RyanClary11 and as well as the show page at LO_Nationals. For all your latest Nationals news and notes, just make sure to check us out over on there. And while you're at it, search Locked On Nationals and make sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, including on YouTube. Again, just search Locked On Nationals. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 moneyline bet. That's $150 if your team wins. And visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. Later on in today's show, we're kind of get into these front office changes and really what we expect to see a little bit differently heading into this season. I think one thing will change in a big way. That's going to be kind of the analytics of baseball and kind of the Nationals stepping a little bit more into that territory for 2024 and beyond. We'll kind of get into as to why we may think that a little bit later on. Also, are you expecting better results in the MLB Draft? The big knock on Mike Rizzo over the last really 5-10 years, you could talk about this, is that he hasn't really hit all too much in the draft. They've since kind of revamped their player development department, revamped their front office. I think there's a lot of different things that are going to be happening moving forward, and the draft could be one of them. We'll discuss that a little later on. But on this December 28th, 2023 episode, we're going to look way ahead into July and talk about three draft prospects. You may be thinking this is way too early, and you're right. But this is why we should be looking ahead to this, because the Nationals, they've got the 10th overall pick this year. Even then, we all talked about the MLB Draft lottery being terrible. The Nationals picking 10th overall, I'll take it. Let's start off with the number one most intriguing prospect, in my opinion. That is first baseman from the University of Wake Forest, Nick Kurtz. As of right now, he is the number 2 prospect over on MLB.com. If you check out their draft rankings there, they've already got it published there. You'll see a lot of different named guys, but first baseman, Wake Forest. Now, you may be thinking, this is one of the Nationals' biggest needs, and you're 100% right. The Nationals, they need a first baseman right here and right now. You could talk about Yohandy Morales, but at this moment in time, he's just kind of like a pipe dream that could be happening over at first base. He's a third baseman as we sit here today. I don't know if the Nationals are going to put him over at first base full time. That's really what we think. But as we sit here now, you have a need over at first base. Now, in the MLB Draft, you never draft for need. I think you have to take the best player available, no matter the situation that you're in, unless you're going to be kind of playing the game that the Orioles have played in the past and get guys with a below slot value in order to spend a little bit later on in the draft, kind of similar to what the Nationals did this last year, kind of putting a ton of money up front for your first few picks and then seeing what can transpire after that. But Nick Kurtz is one of those prospects where you look at him, a lot of people say, are you really going to take a first baseman in a top 10 pick right here, right now? Well, when it comes to Nick Kurtz, I can tell you this, the raw power that he displays in college baseball, in the ACC, especially over at Wake Forest, one of the best teams of this last year's college baseball, this is going to be kind of one of those sexy picks. This is kind of the dream scenario for the Nationals, in my opinion. As we sit here today, being only 20 years old, Nick Kurtz, a lefty bat, he throws lefty as well. This is one of the more intriguing prospects in this year's draft. Being a first baseman, again, kind of going back to it, not a lot of teams are going to look at him and say, there's a lot of value here. Not necessarily. He's the number 2 overall prospect in this year's draft. And let's say he played shortstop or third base, he would be the first overall pick. And I don't think anyone would else be talked about in this opinion here. But going into it, this would make all the sense in the world for the Nationals. Having a 60 hit tool, having a 65 power tool as well. playing first base, which fits the Nationals' need. This would be the dream scenario for the Nationals, getting a college bat, someone who could rise through the rankings relatively quickly, probably within a year or two. You'd see him up in the Nationals Park, hopefully hitting some bombs on Half Street. That is kind of, again, the dream scenario for this Nationals team. But now going back to it, are you just going to draft him because he's a need? No. But it just conveniently fits right there that he could slide into first base eventually, and that is where he'll be for a decade plus. But with Nick Kurtz, kind of something that has stuck out to me is that the power and the hit tool display. This is kind of something that if you can marry the two, you always talk about the speed and the power combination. That's kind of the sexy, flashy tool that everyone's going to be chasing every now and then. But Nick Kurtz and what he can do with his hit tool and get on base and hit for an average as well as power, that is something that if the Nationals can get this into their lineup filled with Dylan Crews, who kind of has that similar kind of power/hit tool combination, except the latter, he's got the better hit tool and a little bit less of a power tool. If you were to have him, Dylan Crews in that lineup, James Wood, Brady House, all these guys combined with Nick Kurtz, and again, also a lefty bat in that scenario, that kind of creates this interesting combination of guys that you can look at and say, this is going to be a future, very star-studded lineup for this Nationals team. Now, as we sit here today, I don't necessarily think that he's going to be there at number 10 overall. A lot of things can happen differently. We were talking about this time last year, Chase Dollander from the University of Tennessee. Some people were raving him to be the best pitching prospect since Steven Strasburg. And then all of a sudden, Paul Skeens came out of nowhere. So there's still a whole season to be played here. But this is the most intriguing prospect, in my opinion, going into the 2024 draft. And this would be one that I think the Nationals, if you can do that, then you have to take advantage and take someone of his caliber. Going forward, the second most intriguing prospect, in my opinion, going forward for this Nationals team is, you may be knowing the name, I'm not going to say it yet, catcher Stanford Malcolm Moore. Right now, he's the number 12 prospect in the MLB draft, according to MLB.com. Now, when you will kind of talk about this, again, you're going to say a catcher. What are we doing? We have Keibert Ruiz. You have Riley Adams. You've got a lot of different catchers already in the system who you could say, you don't really need this, but you're not drafting for need. You're drafting for the most potential, and you're taking the best player available. I think Malcolm Moore, going into this year, will probably be one of the biggest risers in this draft class. I'll explain, but here's the thing. You don't just draft him because he's a power-hitting catcher. You're not just drafting him because of that. You're drafting him, number one, because of the profile. Playing at Stanford, I think people overlook this. When you play at schools that are high standards like Stanford or an Ivy League school, and you're also a top prospect in any sort of draft, the responsibility that you have is so much greater than just playing at Wake Forest, for example. It's so much greater than just playing baseball at the University of Baylor. It's different. The reason why we say that, you've got grades and academics that you're going to have to keep up with. There's a lot of different things that you have to do being at a top university the way that Malcolm Moore is with the University of Stanford. So when you kind of get into his profile, he is a righty thrower, obviously, being behind the dish, but he's a lefty bat as well, in which, again, kind of fits that Nationals profile and what they need. A power bat, left-handed side of the plate, and also he could potentially move over to first base. And that's what some scouts think, because he's always been touted as an offensive first catcher. If you kind of look around Major League Baseball right now, Adley Rutschman, Keibert Ruiz, all the different catchers around baseball that have really kind of taken this notion and really kind of taken into this new role that catchers have with kind of the offensive explosion behind the plate as of recent. But he's got an iffy average glove, you could say, at best. That is kind of what holds him back up to this moment in time. But if scouts were to really believe in this bat the way that I think a lot of people do, you're going to see him probably at catcher, but if not at catcher, you'll probably see him move over to first base eventually. It's not just the seamless transition that you can draft him knowing that he can play first base. He will probably get some time over at first sometime this season for the University of Stanford, just considering he's one of their best hitters, top draft prospect. You're going to want to see this guy in your lineup every single day. but you can't necessarily fit him and play him every day behind the plate. So you're going to have to figure out ways to get him some innings, maybe over at first base. He could probably DH some. And again, when you have the power the way that Malcolm Moore does, and he flashed that his freshman year by hitting 10 plus home runs as a freshman at Stanford, going forward, if you were to get this lefty bat in this national system, he's not the sexiest name out there, but still having an impact college bat, that is something that if I was a scouting director for the Nationals, if I was Mike Rizzo, I'd be looking at this and saying, this is the profile that I want. This fits what we need. We need someone that's going to fly through the system in order to help us here relatively soon, because we got some lottery tickets like Elijah Green, who's going to take some time to develop. You also got a couple other guys like Dalen Lyle, a second-round pick, who could take a little bit of a while to develop. So now you want to get your guys who could really kind of fly through the system and are probably closest to their finished product. And that is why you could be looking at a lot of different college bats this year's class, because that's also what has kind of been the strong suit as of late. There's a lot of big-time college bats who are going to be coming through the system and really coming up into the MLB draft. Last but not least, Tommy Tanks from LSU. You guys know the name. Third baseman Tommy White broke onto the scene last year in the College World Series. Dylan Cruz, Paul Skeens, and Tommy White. That was the big three for LSU there. This year, right now, he's the number 7 MLB draft prospect. A lot of people have already kind of dubbed him as the guy that the Nationals should be going for. Maybe we're right. Maybe it's just the LSU connection. But here's the thing. For what the Nationals need, a third baseman, someone who could also play the corner infield spot over at first base, a 60 power grade, a 55 hit tool. This would make a ton of sense for this Nationals team. And also from a marketing perspective for a team that maybe wants to put a little bit more butts in seats, you're going to have the LSU fan base, one of the most beloved players like Dylan Cruz. You also have Gavin Dugas from last year's team as well. And then you're going to add Tommy White. If you're just kind of talking about from that perspective, from putting butts in seats, you're going to expand to a whole different market with LSU fans. I've already seen a lot of LSU fans follow on for Locked On Nationals here. People care about that. People do care about that. And I think the learners, they kind of see that sexy little draft there. And if you were to add Tommy White into this picture here, you would add a whole other fan base. It's not the likes of adding like Shohei Ohtani or Yamamoto, where you have a whole different market here. But within the United States, there's going to be a lot of interest here in Washington, D.C. if you were to add the likes of a Tommy White. And beyond all that, this kid's a good player. He can hit for average. He can hit for big, massive power, maybe some of the best power in this draft class. And we've seen it on display multiple times at the biggest stage in the College World Series, hitting a walk-off home run. Tommy White's going to be a very intriguing prospect for the Nationals going forward. But again, the big question is he going to stick over at third base? Can this guy make this transition over to first base? Because again, you're not going to be drafting for needs here. But when you look at it, Brady House is more than likely going to be your franchise third baseman. That's at least my opinion at this moment. I think a lot of people would buy into that as well. So where would Tommy White fit in the picture? Well, could make the transition over to first base, could be a DH down the road, and there's nothing wrong with that. I think the Nationals, in this draft, you just got to get a big impact bat, and that will be it. Thank you all for making Locked On Nats your first listen every single day, as we are free and available wherever you get your podcasts. And of course, check us out over on Twitter at Locked On Nationals. And of course, check us out wherever you get your pods. Just search Locked On Nationals there. Next, let me tell you guys about why I truly do believe that this Nationals team, with this new front office, I think we can expect better results in the draft. I'll get into that. Before that, let's tell you guys about our friends over at FanDuel. And guys, score early this NFL season with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 moneyline bet. That's $150 if your team wins. And if you've been thinking about joining FanDuel, there's no better time to get in on the action because the app is so easy to use. And there's a wide range of betting options, including spreads, player props, over-unders, and more. Like tonight, the Browns and the Jets on Thursday Night Football. you know I'm going to bet on Joe Flacco and these Cleveland Browns tonight. I'm going to go over to FanDuel/Locked On. And when I do that, I'll kick off the NFL season, place some money there. It'll be a fun time. And again, you have to do that. Just check out FanDuel.com/Locked On and kick off that NFL season, because FanDuel is always the official partner of the NFL. Thank you all for making Locked On Nats your first listen every single day, as we are free and available wherever you get your podcasts. And check us out over on YouTube. Just search Locked On Nationals there for all your latest Nationals news and notes. And of course, the video portion of the show. The Nationals, let's be honest here. Over the last handful of years, the draft has not been a strong suit for the Nationals. You could say as of recent, getting higher picks has certainly helped the Nationals, adding guys like Brady House into the system, Dylan Cruz as of last year. There've been a couple guys that have hit, like Jake Irvin in later rounds over the last handful of years as well. A lot of different guys that you can talk about as of this last few years. You could say this has been a success. But overall, the big looming fact about this Nationals front office under Mike Rizzo as of recent, they have not been able to really draft as well. But going forward, I think the drafting part of the Nationals and the real problem, I think that part is going to be fixed. And the reason why I say that, I look at the hires from this last offseason, what the Nationals really wanted to do. They looked themselves in the mirror, in which we've talked about this a lot, by the way. The Nationals, they looked themselves in the mirror. They realized what was wrong with themselves. They know that in their heart of hearts that they were lacking analytics. They were lacking the data that was given to other teams like the Orioles, the analytical thinkers like the Rays, the Dodgers, the Braves, the teams like that who really use these things to their advantage. The Nationals, they realize that we don't have it like they do. So this offseason, number one, they made spending in technology and adding advanced analytics a big to-do thing of this last offseason, and they've done that in a lot of different ways. Adding Brad Ciolek from the Baltimore Orioles, someone who can run your draft department and really kind of oversee all the different scoutings. He was a key part in adding guys like for the Baltimore Orioles, like Jackson Holliday, Gunnar Henderson, Joey Ortiz, Adley Rutschman, Heston Kjerstad, Connor Norby, Kobe Mayo, and Colton Cowser. All those guys are the next wave of these prospects, including Jackson Holliday, who's the number one prospect in all of baseball, and Adley Rutschman, again, former number one prospect in all of baseball, and also Gunnar Henderson, another former number one prospect in all of baseball. Now, I'm not saying Brad Ciolek is the only reason as to why the Nationals have gone this far. I'm not going to say that Brad Ciolek is going to come in, wave his magic wand, and all of a sudden we're going to have the number one farm system in all of baseball. It's going to be a process, but I think this process has gotten started on the right path already, because the Nationals, they know what they have done wrong. They know what they have been missing in years past. Analytics are going to be a major addition going forward. And with that, you can expect better draft results with it, because it's not just about getting a scouting report nowadays, seeing what a guy can do best, seeing what his ceiling will be, seeing what his floor will be, and just saying, this is a guy that I want. You want to see exit velocities. You want to see his whatever you want to see out there. The data is there. And I think the Mike Rizzo-led Washington Nationals organization in the past, if you want to knock him about one thing, I think that is a fair knock, that it has not always been there. And it's not just on Mike Rizzo. It's also on the Lerner family and not really kind of investing their money into this, kind of waiting to play this game at a little bit of a later date, in my opinion. But now going into it, you have these things that you are checking off these boxes in your to-do list, and it's starting to kind of slim down here of what the needs of what you really need to be an analytical organization. And it's also not just about Brad Ciolek as well. There's also Eddie Longos, who's been within the Nationals for quite some time now, been in the player development side, and who's now will oversee that player development department as well. He's also been a guy who's been big into analytics and have been big into the draft. He knows guys within the system. He knows all the minor league coaches and players and all the different things that you really kind of need. He's been their hands-on guy within the organization and is kind of smooth in the analytical department as well. So when you have guys like Eddie Longos now, Brad Ciolek, and as well as Danny Haas, who's going to be your scouting director for the Nationals. Danny Haas, a traditional scout as well, but he has even talked about, I believe with Masson and Bobby Blanco, has even said that we've kind of worked our way around it the last few years. I have personally, talking about Danny Haas here, has taken a step up into analytics and really what he wants to see and what he wants to get out of the players and really what he wants to find and what those analytics say. Because there can be a fine balance, and that's what the Nationals should do, and that's what I expect them to do. There's going to be a fine balance of analytics and as well as traditional scouting, because that is where Mike Rizzo comes from. That is where his bread has been made over the last handful of years. So going forward, analytics, it's going to play a big role. But how big of a role? Well, we can get into that a little bit more. But before that, let's tell you guys about Locked On, because Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. Again, just search Locked On Sports Today. Now let's get back into it, as we kind of talked about it a little bit this last segment, but the Nationals and their approach into analytics. Some people just hear analytics and just want to put their finger in their ear and say, let's not talk about it. It does not matter. But the realistic thing is, everyone nowadays, at least the great organizations, they use analytics. The Tampa Bay Rays, great organization, a team that has consistently put out top prospects and have found ways to plug holes within their farm system with guys that may have been fool's gold to another team. They come in here, all of a sudden, they're the big treasure that everyone's been looking for. Teams in the past have kind of always shied away from analytics, but nowadays it's at the forefront of baseball. This is going to have to change. And I think the Nationals have already taken the necessary steps to make those changes, hiring Danny Haas to be your scouting director, someone who, again, has kind of made that transition from a traditional scouting background into a little bit of an analytical role as well. You can kind of smoothen that pace and kind of measure out the analytics from Brad Ciolek, who is a key contributor into analytics, and as well as Eddie Longos, who will most likely be a key contributor to analytics as well. Going forward, this is going to be a big deal. This is going to be kind of that reason as to why you could see Dalen Lyle produce. This is going to be the reason why you may see Andrew Pinckney kind of come out of nowhere. These teams that kind of draft for talent, like the Orioles in the past, maybe taking a Andrew Pinckney type of bat in the draft later on in the rounds. You don't really see those guys develop fully with the Nationals. At least you haven't in the years past. But now with these analytics, kind of getting all the equipment that you need to put your organization in the best way to hopefully process these prospects through a system, going through an analytical role here, and as well as a traditional background scouting, that is when you'll see a big transition, in my opinion, with the Nationals. It's not going to happen overnight. But again, if the Nationals were to really kind of put their foot in this doorway, I think they could probably take advantage of something that they just simply have not over years past. Thank you all for making Locked On Nats your first listen every single day, as we are free and available wherever you get your podcasts. And of course, thank you for sticking through me, as I've had a sore throat all week long here. I'm sure you could probably hear it. So thank you all for making Locked On Nats your first listen every single day, as we are free and available wherever you get your podcasts. I'll catch you guys on the flip side. Enjoy the weekend. I'll catch you on Friday.